negative space as an oxygen for your image, letting it breathe and come alive.
Thank you so much for tuning in for another episode of Photography Radio. My name is Tomasz, and today you are listening to Beyond the Frame with Olaf Sztaba, where he challenges you to take visual risks and think differently about your photography. Honest, bold, and unapologetic. Typical Olaf. Enjoy.
Can you imagine your life without photography? No? Then you will love this show. And it doesn't matter if you're a DSLR, a mirrorless, or a mobile phone shooter. We're here to help your photography grow. This is Photography Radio.
Hello, my photographic friend. How are you today? It wasn't that far when I was recording the first episode of this podcast. Back then, I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know whether it would work or not. But I do know now, and I would like to thank you for all your kind words and ideas you're sending my way. On this very topic, some of us have already started the question and answer episodes. So let me know if you want me to do the same. Or you want me to keep ranting. What I mean by question and answers, I'm thinking about you going to photographyradio.com and asking some questions. Just let me know what you want me to talk about, or maybe you have some photography related questions. So I would be really happy to answer some of them. Okay, so what's new? I just returned from a very short but amazing photography trip to Montana. And as I mentioned to you in my winter episode, this is my favorite time of the year to travel and photograph. And as I said, I really enjoyed this trip. I had the chance to shoot in a few ghost towns. And, guys, that I really, really enjoy doing so. I visited one ghost town. It's called Bannack in Montana. We visited an old hotel there with a truly amazing interior. I was shooting some landscapes and, of course, my crazy creative travel photography, if I can call this way. Okay, so that brings me to today's topic, and I have to say, as a courtesy of Tomasz, we had a chat today, and I asked him, so what do you want me to talk about, Tomasz? And he said, negative space. Okay, my first reaction was, well, that's boring. But the more I thought about it, more I got convinced that this is such a important topic, and despite the fact that I have been writing and talking about this, I think it would be okay to talk about this today as well. So let's get to it. You know that the process of crafting imagery is something I have been studying for years. And when observing the world around us, we all are after something cool, unusual, and we are looking for these amazing photographic subjects. It could be a person, animal, or an object. And of course, there are so many images out there that we try to have this perfect, unusual subject. And it's sometimes really difficult to find it. So in order to do it, we often buy expensive trips to these amazing scenic locations around the world. We travel to historic sites. We spend time researching Google Maps for the best views. hire models, look for some unique characters or stories. In short, anything that would give us this visual advantage. And that's not a bad thing at all. But here's the issue. In this crazy pursuit of a great image, we are so preoccupied with the subject that we often forget about the rest of the photo. And we all know that the subject is important, but it's only a small portion of your image. Okay? In fact, we get so hung up to the subject that we forget to design the rest of the image. And Olaf, so what do you mean by the rest of the image? I think it's safe to say that the rest of the image is, some people, well, we all call it negative space, or something that I like even more, white space. So why I'm talking about this? Because when I study images from different photographers, I conclude that this is where a good image turns into great image. So let me explain it. We are living in a very loud and colorful world, visually colorful world. And when we go on a trip or walk the streets of a big cities, there are so many interesting subjects. Also, as I mentioned earlier, some of us have opportunities to hop on the plane and fly to some cool locations. So, in other words, the great subjects are everywhere. And I think whether we want to admit it or not, I think we all have access to them. So if this is the case, if this barrier of having access to great subject is broken and we all can do it, so how can we create great images? Well, here is the key. When you have a great subject and we get so excited about it, we often forget about crafting the entire image. We forget that finding a great subject is just a part of the task. Not only we try to place the subject within the frame, but we forget that we also must craft the frame, or negative space, or white space. You may think, why all of you refer to it as a white space? I really like this phrase, white space. And I'll tell you why. Because it reminds me of how painters create their masterpieces. They start with white canvas and then carefully start adding elements inside the frame. They may start with the subject and go from there, or they might put it all in the frame. We cannot do this in photography, of course, but what we can do is arrange the frame using a few methods which I'm going to talk about in the future posts. Here's another way of thinking about negative space. It reminds me about writing. Sometimes you read the entire page about something and you have a hard time connecting with what you read, describing what you just read. On the other hand, sometimes you encounter one sentence, one very simple sentence, maybe a thought, but it really stays with you. So every subject needs a breathing space to operate within. If you clutter this space, your subject is losing its importance, its visual power. The photo becomes a visual rant, or even worse, one big mess. And I guess we are living in such a complex world, visually complex world, that we try to outgun each other. I was just, before I'm recording this episode, I was watching some ads for the Super Bowl. And I have to admit, I was in some sort of disappointed, because most of them are designed the way to be so flashy. Lots of color, lots of action. Once you watch one after the other, you almost think like, oh, you lose interest. And I started to think, you know what? Just give me black space. Nothing. Can you imagine to look at the screen, there's nothing for, let's say, 15 seconds? I would say, what's going on here? Of course, I'm kind of going crazy right now, but you get my point. So, here is what I try to say today. When you shoot, put more attention towards everything but your subject. I know it sounds crazy. You may think, Olaf, how can I do it? But think about it. The subject is given. It's there for you. You don't need to obsess over your subject. In fact, once you put much more attention to your negative space or white space, are organized well, and even if you make a small mistake with your subject, the photo is going to be way more powerful than if you messed up your negative space. And quite often you can actually create your own negative space. I have used so many techniques to achieve that. Let me give you an example. In some of my images, I block a part of my image with a wall, overexposing or underexposing. And by doing so, I create really beautiful negative space. Okay, we need to finish soon. Going back to my initial thought, of course the subject is important, but once you identify your subject in your photo, make sure to shift your attention to everything else that is there. The more work you put into arranging the white space, the more powerful your photograph will become. I often remind myself, okay, Olaf, now you have the subject, make sure to pay it adequate respect. But organize the space around the subjects so it's not only complements it, but it also invites the viewer to go on a visual journey of exploration. It's so important. Negative space is an oxygen for your image, letting it breathe and come alive. Wow, I just created the quote. That's not bad. So, let it be then like this. What do you think? Do you agree with me? How do you deal with the subject in negative space? Let me know and let's have a conversation. As I said at the beginning of this podcast, please make sure go to photographyradio.com and just give us a shout, okay? And do not forget to share this podcast with your friends. Thank you so much for this meeting, and see you next week.
Thank you so much for tuning in today. Hit subscribe on your podcast app. It would mean a lot for us to have you as our regular listener. Head over to photographyradio.com to drop your suggestion for future editions of Photography Radio or simply to say hello. We would absolutely love to hear from you. In the meantime, have a wonderful night, and we will be back with more photography in your ears very soon.